It is my pleasure to turn today's program over to Mr. Jeff Green. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Erica. And obviously you've done this many a times because you did it flawlessly like a recording, so kudos to you. Good afternoon, everyone. Jeff Green. I am a member of the 210 HR Exec Board, and on behalf of the board, we welcome you all to our first of a series of lunch and learns around attracting and retaining talent. We plan on doing this quarterly for at least this year, and then reevaluating what kind of value we want to offer to the industry next year. And just to give you a brief 20-second history, we've been around for about 15 years. Annually, we were known for doing an HR summit in June during Fashion Footwear Association of New York's big market. And then last year we said, you know, we want to do something different. We want to add a different value to the industry. So we wanted to be able to have a forum where we were able to share best practices, have two-way communication as far as what's going on, topics that help people develop. We really wanted to have more value to the HR community out there and the footwear abroad. So we're thinking, you know, how better to do that when people have their busy schedules. So we thought that a webinar would be the best, so that way people don't have to worry about transferring or traveling into one location, and then we can get the buzz going, and then we can decide if we really want to go back to doing a summit. And if we do a summit, do we do multiple summits throughout the year? Do we do them in different locations? Those are things that we're all thinking about. So the quick overview on what we are thinking for this year, and if you have any feedback as far as topics that you would like for us to talk about, or if you want to participate in being a member of the committee, then please reach out to any one of us. So Garrison from ECHO, Stefano from Polaris, Jan from Wolverine Worldwide, Mike Hussel from Stock, Lori Bradburn, formerly from Kenneth Cole, and myself, Jeff Green from Foot Locker. And I'm going to turn over now to Lee Benson from Steve Madden to give you a little bit of a perspective of our relationship with 210.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Benson. I'm also a part of the 210 Executive HR Leadership Board. So as many of you may know or may not know, 210's mission is to improve the lives and careers of footwear employees and their families. So when you think about it, we as HR professionals work to play a similar role. We support our companies, but we also support our employees. So the 210 Leadership Group is the bridge between 210 and each organization. So it's a chance for us to become 210 ambassadors within our own companies to ensure that all of our employees are aware of 210's programs and services. It's a chance for us to provide feedback to 210. So what we hear from our employees, we then let 210 know about what employees need most. And it's a chance for us to engage with each other, to engage with other HR professionals in the industry, to expand our networks, to share best practices, and together and learn from each other. And that's what today is all about. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Joanna Linder from 210, and she'll give you a little bit more information about 210.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I wanted to take a quick moment before we get into the topic at hand and just first thank you all for joining us today and for being in the loop on all things 210. If you are here, most likely you got an email or you saw something on our website and it sparked interest. And that is really our primary message today, is how we can really help spread the word through HR leaders. So any of you on the call, we hope that this is a very insightful and helpful discussion today. But in addition to that, we also hope that you see the value that 210 can bring to professional development and sharing of best practices and all the things that Jeff and Lindsay outlined. The one thing I will say is that our biggest challenge at this point is simply awareness within the industry. This year, 2019, is our 80th anniversary of 210. We've been around since 1939, but we have less than 50% awareness in the industry. So as you all know, we provide emergency financial assistance, scholarships, professional development programs for everyone who works in the footwear industry in the U.S. And if we grant financial assistance to anyone, they never have to pay back. It's completely confidential. So that's a tremendous safety net, and footwear is the only industry in the U.S. to have its own foundation. So with all of that said, we do have this tremendous opportunity to help more folks. We just simply need them to know that we're here. So that's where you all come in, and as HR, so in your own organizations to simply help us spread the word. So the last thing I will say before I hand it over is we found out recently through some research that 1 in 3 employees in the footwear industry need the type of services that 210 provides. So as we know, the majority of the industry, about 75% work in retail, distribution centers, warehouses, manufacturing, things like that. They don't necessarily have the benefit of being on calls like this, but they do have the benefit of having you all in their HR departments and the ability for you to spread the word about everything that we offer. So we're looking to our HR folks to help open the doors for 210 to really get in front of the majority of the workforce. So thank you for letting me give my little 210 pitch. And I am going to hand it over to Adrienne Altman from Willis Towers Watson, which is a leading HR consulting organization. And Adrienne leads the North American Rewards line of business, and she will now take us through the Total Rewards journey discussion. Thanks so much.
Great so much, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. We really appreciate the opportunity to be on the call today. And we have about 50 minutes left, and just before we jump in, I'm going to just share how we're going to spend the next 50 minutes. First of all, I'm going to start out by sharing some of our research that we've done with both retail organizations and all types of organizations globally around Total Rewards. And then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Dana, who leads our retail industry, to make it much more real and share some experiences of some of the things that we've done with other clients in the retail space. And then finally, we're going to open it up for questions at the end of the call. When Dana is done, we'll open up the lines so you can ask a question verbally. But if you have a question while we're talking, just submit it on the web, and we'll be sure to respond either during or after the presentation. So that I'm going to get going because I don't have that much time to get through a lot of information, and I'm going to try and distill each of these very busy slides down to 1 or 2 nuggets and points for you to take away. We did the survey in 2018, nearly 1,700 organizations in 44 countries, so pretty impressive in terms of the size, and we have a lot of industries covered, including retail and wholesale, and we'll share both the broader results as well as specific retail results. So if we jump to the next section, what I wanted to share with you today is, first and foremost, talk about what we found in the survey in terms of what leading companies do differently from all other organizations. And the way leaders are defined is they've identified themselves as being well ahead of their competitors in terms of their total rewards philosophy, their programs, how they communicate. Essentially, we found there were 3 things that they did differently that stood out for us. Number 1 is they think about total rewards very holistically with much more of a strategic mindset. And when we think about total rewards and the way we frame the survey, it's not just base and bonus. It includes elements of rewards like careers, like flexible work arrangements, etc. The second thing that they do differently is they use analytics to understand their employees and what they expect and what they value. And then finally, they leverage technology to engage their employees and also to provide personalized communications. And what we mean by that is it's not dissimilar to when you Google something You want to go on a vacation somewhere, and the next day you get personalized content that highlights hotels in the location that you had searched for the day before. A little sometimes, but more and more we're seeing employers move in the same direction, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So moving along, when we think about leading organizations in terms of thinking holistically and being strategic, I'll focus you on a couple of numbers on this busy slide. On the far right, the leaders at 78%, most of them are articulating their total rewards strategy. Whereas when we look at either retail or the rest of those organizations who are just competitive, it's much closer to somewhere around the middle. And retail falls right in line with the rest of the pack. We also highlight on this page, and you're going to hear a lot about this, both in terms of the results, but more importantly in terms of what we share about the case studies, is in terms of differentiating offerings from your competitors, and how did our companies respond in the survey. Only about a quarter of retailers think that they truly are differentiating their total reward programs. So that's only 1 out of 4, whereas leading organizations are much more likely leading the pack in terms of their offering. Then if we could jump to the next slide. So just talking about segmentation, one of the things that we have heard a lot about over the last couple of years is that organizations are moving away from treating all employees the same. And perhaps I might have hypothesized that retail would have been ahead of the pack, just given the very distinct populations that you have that range from those that are in the distribution centers, your hourly workforce, to some of the digital talent that you now have to hire. What we're seeing here is that retail is pretty much in line with the rest of the world, that only about a third have actually articulated a formal philosophy to differentiate the workforce in terms of what they do for total rewards. Typically what we see is it's about role. So like I just said, having a different philosophy for maybe your supply chain versus your digital talent. And typically when we see differentiation, it's more for comp than it is for benefits. I would hypothesize, and it's just my perspective, that a lot of companies might be differentiating, but they may not officially articulate it. All right, moving along. The other thing we talked about is analytics and measurement. You'd be shocked to hear that a very small percentage of all organizations do a lot of measurement when it comes to total rewards, in particular, even knowing what the cost of their total reward programs are. And when you take it to the next level and you think about, okay, so I understand the costs of the total pie and what each element of total reward costs, should I understand what our employees value? How are those rewards elements really going to drive how I'm going to actually retain people, how I'm going to engage people, and how I'm going to be able to attract people. So what we see here, and again, retail is in the middle of the pack, is that there are very few organizations that are actually doing this. But you'll see in a little bit, there's some good news on the horizon. So if we flip the slide, one of the things that I mentioned earlier was around technology. Maybe this is not surprising, but most companies have technology or digital technology. The problem is they're not using it properly. And I see a very, very small proportion of both retail organizations as well as all others that are actually having the technology and using it very effectively. Leaders are much more likely to use it well if they have it. So next slide. We're hearing from employees for those clients that do go out and ask employees about what they value and what they want. They want choice, they want flexibility, and they want personalized communication. However, what we're seeing is that 3 out of 5 of the leading companies are doing that. When it comes to both retail and all other organizations, the percentages drop quite considerably to around 40%. The leading organizations close to 60%. Going. So what does this mean? How do we close the gaps? And we thought it might be useful to share at a very high level how we might close some of the gaps. And then as I said, Dana's going to make it much more real and focus in on, well, what did we actually do with some of our retail organizations, our retail clients? There are 5 things that I'm going to cover in probably 5 minutes. First of all is understand what employees value. It seems like a no-brainer. If you understand what they value, you're more likely going to be able to attract, retain, and engage them. Consider employee well-being as a top priority, and we'll share some data with you on that. Make effective use of technology, measure the cost and the impact of the programs, and finally, prioritize fairness and purpose-driven benefits in I&D. So we're going to do a quick read-through on those 5 themes. And the first is about understanding what office people value. And about half of the organizations say that they understand what their current employees value. But we took a little step further, and we said it's not only about your current employees, it's also about those that you're about to hire or would like to hire. And the numbers obviously drop, not surprisingly, but are not that different from your own internal employees. And then finally, we asked the question about non-employee talent. If along. So the second theme was really around well-being. And I'm sure many of you on the phone have been with issues around well-being and are really making this a top priority. And when we talk about well-being, we're talking about financial well-being, we're talking about physical well-being, and we're talking about emotional and social well-being. So when we look at this, what is very interesting is we do see retail lagging somewhat from all organizations in terms of considering well-being a top priority. And we see leading organizations, for the most part, almost 3/4 of them making this a top priority. When it comes to work-life balance, we retail actually being pretty consistent with all other organizations, but yet again, leaders tend to stand out at nearly 3/4 of them saying that they provide employees with work-life balance. And make sure that your total reward programs are designed in a way to actually help your employees achieve that well-being. Again, we see retailers lagging somewhat. Surprised by this, but employers actually give themselves poor marks in terms of total rewards communications. I think too often companies have really great programs, but it's sometimes just about the understanding or the lack of understanding due to less effective communication. And most retailers also give themselves poor marks, which is pretty consistent with all other organizations. Moving along in terms of the using digital technology, what I found interesting here was that retailers on the bottom of the slide think that they're more effective in using technology to communicate different messages to different audiences. So, for example, you may communicate one message to your store employees and another message to your corporate employees. So maybe you're not as surprised as we were, but definitely almost at the same rate or the same clip as some of the leading organizations. Okay, and I'm going through this really fast so that we can get to the fun stuff. So when it comes to the good news, I said this earlier, is that there is some change on the horizon. We are seeing quite a number of companies really thinking about taking a much more analytical approach to measuring how employees feel and making sure that they make the right decisions, and also understanding costs of their programs. And if you see here, almost 60-something%, so about 2/3 of retail organizations are either considering a change in this regard or planning it in the next 3 years. So really what we're saying here is a lot of retail and other organizations are realizing that they need to take a much more robust view of their total reward offerings, understand the cost, but know that if you're going to change something, be it a takeaway or be it an ad, do it with the knowledge of what does it mean in terms of the impact and the perceptions from your employees. And finally, just a little bit on diversity and inclusion and diversity. And this is a really, really important topic for all organizations, and I'm sure retail is by no means different. And so what we've tried to highlight on the slide, and it's not an exhaustive list, are some of the things that employers can do to increase the ability to attract and retain diverse employee populations. This is actually having a formal diversity program. I'm going to highlight a couple of others here. Supporting external initiatives and networks to showcase, be it female role models and other diverse role models outside of the organization, but just as important, to establish, if you don't have them, the internal networks, but support the networks as well. And here's just one example. Support return-to-work programs when your employees go out on maternity leave, and in some cases even paternity leave. So I know this has been a flyby, 20 minutes of hiding 1,700 responses and a very extensive survey, but I think Dana is going to spend the next 20 minutes really bringing this to life for you in terms of how this actually works in practice and what we see other organizations doing.
So thank you, Adrienne. So I will be talking about, you see here sort of the pathway, right, and the priorities and the work we've been doing with other retailers and folks in the industry about how do we set those priorities. And Adrienne, talked a lot about measurement and really understanding the implications of what you're doing. Really setting the priorities is about doing a lot of that, right? We have limited resources, we have limited dollars, and it's really about understanding where we're going to use those resources in the most efficient and effective ways in terms of delivering value to our different associate populations, and how do we prioritize those. So that's what I'll be talking about over the next 20 minutes and maybe even a little bit less, so we can have some good time for questions and open dialogue. So what are we focusing on? You see a lot, both in terms of leading organizations, but also in terms of retail. You see the word technology on this page a lot, and I think it really is about investing in the technology both for employees and for employers to be able to, one, make it effective and strong decisions and supported decisions in terms of what you're going to provide and how that's going to be implications of that, but also using technology to better communicate, better allowing access to your employees to understand what they have and what you are delivering and the value of that. Transparency goes right hand in hand with that, right, in terms of improving the communication, how we deliver the messages to our associates. But I think what was really interesting here is really towards the bottom of the page, which is what retailers are considering changing over the next 3 years. And here you see a lot around flexibility, choice, moving away from one-size-fits-all approach. We've historically been very, very one-size-fits-all. And we now, again, given limited resources, limited dollars, the pressure that we have in terms of making the right investments with our dollars has really moved the needle for retailers to start moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach and really taking a more segmented perspective in terms of how you think about your associates or populations. And that's what I'll be talking about a lot more over the next few slides. I think went 1 minute. Okay, I clearly can't and my own slides. Okay. On the next slide, you see just a model for how we think about what we call the talent value proposition. And this is really a holistic look at all of the elements of rewards. So not just total rewards, but also work and how work gets done, the purpose. And again, that's becoming much more important to some of the folks that we're hiring into our organization and the people that we're bringing in and want to bring into the organization. And it really all starts at the top with our leadership. And effective leadership is required in order to deliver on this framework. They have the impact on this entire framework, the business strategy, the human capital dimensions, and certainly the outcomes. The bottom piece really speaks to the supporting tools and processes that are really needed to bring this to life. And again, we talked a lot about communication, technology, measurement, and then, of course, how we manage that change through the organization. And you can see here when we look at the outcomes, when we do this well, there is significant return on investment in terms of better financial performance, attraction, retention, engagement. So all of those things Adrienne was talking about in terms of how we measure this, we see this, right? We see this in the numbers and the data, and when leaders come and say we need to show the ROI of making this investment in our people, it's right here on the page that we will outperform our peers. Our associates will be more productive. They will stay with the organization longer, and we'll be able to bring people into the organization in a more effective way. So a few slides. This is really going to start getting into the case studies. And talked a lot, again, about the leading organizations and how they have total rewards in a more segmented way. And again, you know, we have some discrete pockets within retail organizations that we're really starting to take a more focused look on. So when we think about supply chain or distribution centers, store population, our technology and digital talent that we need to bring into the organization, keep within the organization, and then certainly our leadership, cadre, and some of our really key corporate functions are starting to do this in a more thoughtful and segmented way. Again, we've historically been more one-size-fits-all, but there's a lot of changing labor markets and talent demands. More companies are looking at the total reward strategy across the various segments. Look at stores and supply chain, you know, there's tremendous pressure of minimum wage, increase in broad competition, really putting a significant focus on those segments. In terms of technology talent, retail is really needing to significantly upskill this talent from what it's maybe had in the past. We need to attract and retain that talent from sources we've never had to bring that talent in from before, right, outside the industry. And what we're finding is the traditional retail total rewards models are just no longer working to be able to effectively do that. When we think about the corporate and executive world, you know, when we think about shareholders or performance expectations, it's shifting dramatically. There's tremendous pressure on some of the traditional ways we thought about performance within the industry, and it's really causing major shifts, particularly when we think about metrics, pay for performance incentive programs. And again, this is all causing retailers to have to segment the population, but first and foremost, and very importantly, understand the population and what the different segments are going to value, what they want, what their perspectives are, and really taking a more holistic perspective. Go through a case study for each of these populations, and I can tell you over the last couple of years, I've been doing a tremendous amount of work, very focused on different segments of the organization, and really thoughtfully think about the total reward strategy for each one of these segments, and that's what I'll be talking about over the next few slides. So we'll start with supply chain. Supply chain is a hot topic right now, particularly in retail. So we worked recently with a specialty apparel retailer, and they were really facing increased competition. They were seeing a lot higher turnover. They were seeing other distribution centers and other non-distribution centers popping up in the backyards of their distribution centers, and they were really starting to struggle to attract talent and keep that talent. They also had two distribution centers in two very different locations and with two very different populations. So they were really having to look at their different DCs even as almost segmented populations because they have very different requirements and talent pools. And where we first started for this retailer in particular was really conducting some focus groups and doing some surveying of the distribution center workers. We did tours of the distribution centers and actually talked to folks and asked them what they valued, what made them come to the organization, what made them stay there. We're trying to understand some of their preferences and the requirements for those talents. Some of their other challenges were around, developing a clear line of sight to metrics. They had a lot of their folks in the distribution center tied to corporate metrics, which just couldn't really get a handle on, right? They really needed to focus and hone in on those things that folks could impact and feel like they had line of sight over. And so we did do some looking at their incentive programs to focus on DC level measurement around productivity, quality, safety, things like that. Challenge we find, and this is both supply chain, I think this also happens within the stores, probably more highlighted in the supply chain though, is really developing that connection to the brand and the company. These folks are pretty remote, and even in the stores though, they're surrounded by the brand, they're surrounded by the customers, so it's easier to feel that connection. It's a little bit harder in a distribution center, and so as it was interesting as we actually toured the distribution center, they were making renovations to the center itself to just look and feel more like their corporate office, more like their stores, and just even bringing in some of that level of connection, bringing leaders to the distribution centers to feel that connection becomes really, really important with some of these remote populations of folks. And then finally, one of their biggest challenges was really around creating career paths. We have a lot of folks and a lot of people in the distribution centers. We'll have a lot of unique jobs and a lot of unique career paths that we can really offer folks. And it just becomes a bit of a challenge when you're trying to move people through the organization and give people opportunities to really find those opportunities. Those are some of the challenges. That was some of the issues we were trying to solve for. And you can see some actions we took and or considered. So when I talked a little bit about the focus group surveying, the second one here was very critical. They had very high turnover in the first year or two. And so what we were looking at was providing more frequent pay increases in the first couple of years, particularly to respond to like the Amazon announcement of $15 an hour. They couldn't get their start rate there, but if they could move people there a little bit quicker as they were already well ingrained in the organization, they thought that would make a positive impact to that first and second year turnover issue that they were facing. And then the last 2 points I think are also extremely important, and we'll see these as well on when we talk about the stores, but really around recognition and providing a recognition platform for managers. When we did the distribution center tour, we talked to one gentleman and we said, why do you stay here? What do you value? What's important to you? And he was just such this nice old little man, and he pulls out this Buffalo Wild Wings card, and he said, this is what keeps me here. This is why I stay. I love stuff like this. And so, it's probably a $20 Buffalo Wild Wings card, but it goes such a long way, particularly for these populations. And I think we've sort of lost sight of that over the years as we were starting to think more about these big benefit programs and these big incentive programs. And we thought about these little things that can have such a huge impact. The idea around formalizing the branding and communication around it becomes very, very important, particularly when we think about a connection to the bigger retail brands. Here that was also very important that I'm going to move on shortly, but I want to make sure it's highlighted here because it is very important in the distribution supply chain environment. And that's really around flexibility of scheduling and flexibility around some other work-life benefits. Childcare, commuting, these are big, big issues for these folks. And the more we can provide value in terms of these small things really, really makes a big difference and a huge impact for them. Move to the store population. So working with a large big box retailer, really to find their total strategy. And their leadership kept saying, what do we stand for as a company? They would get to January 1 every year and Walmart and some of the other big companies would come out with their announcements of where they were moving their minimum wage, and they'd get all these phone calls from different leaders saying, are we moving there? What are we doing? Are we increasing our minimum wage? They said, we got to hold on here, right? We don't want to continue to react to the market. We want to define who we are. We want to do that in a more proactive way. We work with them to really think about their total reward strategy around their store and hourly store population. Found that their culture was a very strong retention tool, but really fell short in terms of being able to allow them to attract talent, and that was really one area they were having difficulty. Really wanting to enhance the customer experience, and a lot of retailers are doing this. We're hearing a lot of this within the industry, but that has a huge implication and impact on the type of talent we need in the organization. And certainly, as increasing minimum wage, right, we're seeing the pay ranges continuing to narrow. The pay is no longer a competitive advantage within the store. Everyone's going to be at $15 an hour at some point, and we're not necessarily going to pay our worker, double that, right? Everyone's going to be in a pretty narrow band. And so it becomes, what are the other things, right? That holistic perspective that's going to be our differentiator. So, really want to be targeted, very surgical. We identified critical markets, ones where moving very dramatically in terms of minimum wage, ones where we were growing and needing to make more investments. Roles, right, those lead roles are going to be our next store managers or assistant store managers, really ensuring our investments were made very efficiently. Reviewing our compression approach. We have to be compliant with minimum wage. We don't have to provide compression, and certainly most retailers are finding they can't provide compression in the way they used to, given the frequency and the magnitude of minimum wage raises. And I talked about this on the last page, and this is extremely important in this environment too. Recognition, flexibility, looking at time off, scheduling, again, back to those work-life. And again, the recognition, many retailers, we actually just completed a survey on field incentives. Most retailers don't provide a formal incentive to their hourly population. So the recognition platform becomes very, very important to be able to drive that above and recognize that above and beyond performance. I'll continue to move because I want to make sure we have time for questions and some open discussion. So I'm going to shift pretty dramatically from stores to technology. It's a little bit of two ends of the spectrum, although it's really not, because we're asking our store folks to do a lot more in terms of technology as well. But with a grocery retailer, to really hone in on our hot skilled talent, they were having difficulty competing outside of retail for these roles. They were looking at technology organizations, financial services, the general industry. And traditional pay models are just lower in the pay, right? But the model is different. The way we orient pay is very, very different in retail, and we're finding that it's not working. The idea of the dual career tracks, really allowing people to become just very level subject matter experts in a technology field versus having to become a manager, was really, really important to provide some different types of career paths and a bit more options and alternatives for folks as they move through the organization. Some of the actions we were taking or looking to take, increasing market positioning. We know we can't necessarily recruit this talent at the median of the market. We need to be positioned a little bit higher. But we also need to clearly define what those labor markets are, and they are shifting and evolving. Providing premiums for hot skilled talent. We see this a lot in the market. Again, those frequent pay increases, we know the market is moving not just to 3%, which is what the general market's moving at, but for some jobs they're moving at 10%, low double digits. And so we have to provide increases a bit more frequently to ensure we're keeping up with that aggressive movement. Use equity, not just more expanded, in a more thoughtful way, so giving more ad hoc awards, really having a pool set aside to be able to recognize and reward some of this talent. Milestone bonuses, really giving people something to work for that's very much aligned to what they're working on at that time. We feeling that they have the line of sight and impact on that. Some bonuses when we're trying to attract this talent. We're seeing a tremendous increased use in sign-on bonuses, sign-on equity, not just to buy folks out, but to really those traditional pay models a little bit more lucrative at the front end. And then again, back to those dual career paths to allow for some more advanced career progression. And finally, I'll just talk a little bit about sort of the executive and corporate world. And we'll open it up. So we worked with a multi-branded online retailer that really has grown a lot by acquisition. And they wanted to modernize their programs. They wanted to align them, ensure they were consistent. They wanted to consolidate their brands and really have a sort of one approach, if you will. This was interesting as well. Their engagement scores were very low on pay for performance alignment and line of sight. So we worked with them to develop a total rewards philosophy, one that would really resonate with the whole organization, but that could be tailored as they needed to for different segments and different parts of their associate base. We did a survey to ensure that their total reward programs were optimized, right? What do people value? What do people want? And looking at this much more holistically. To react to that pay for performance alignment, we redesigned both their short and long-term incentive programs to make sure that there was line of sight and accountability. Looking at metrics, looking at the way we're measuring, the level of measurement, reviewing types of vehicles we're using on the long-term side. They were very historic stock option user. They're now maturing into a multi-branded or mature organization, and stock options just weren't as valuable. Looking at talent review process, again, making sure that those assessments are being used in the most effective way. And then really focusing on some of those other aspects of rewards that are really outside of the realm of pay. So stop there. I'm going to ask our event specialist, Jerica, to open up the line for questions or any open discussion, anything you folks are doing that you want to share with the group that's particularly interesting or innovative, or things you're thinking about in terms of your reward programs. So if you could please on the line.
Sure. And at this time, if you would like to ask a question over the telephone line, set a *1 on your telephone keypad. A reminder, you may ask a question through the web console. Look at the Q&A panel, type your question in the open area, and click Send to Submit. And I'm going to ask a question over the phone line. Question, caller, please state your name and your question.
Hi, my name is Devin East. I work with Apple. There was a lot of discussion this afternoon about technology, and I was curious if there was sort of any research around types of technology or types of applications that are looking for, because I know obviously the millennial group, they've grown up with technology, so I was curious if there was any discussion or research around that.
I'll take a stab. I'm not aware of specific research we've done on applications per se. I think the one thing we've heard is employees want to be treated like consumers. And so what we mean by that is the consumer experience. So if you want to buy something, do something, book book a trip or whatever it might be. It's that experience that they want replicated in the work environment.
Yes.
So very real time, very accessible, handheld, etc.
That's exactly right. So it wasn't in here, but there was some statistics that came out of this research looking at, the types, not necessarily very specific types of technology, but, the use of the internet and HR portals is a very historic way of communicating with our associates and our employees. And, the shift that we're seeing is towards more social media technology, more mobile technology. So as Adrienne was saying, more accessible, more real-time versus some of those more historic, traditional ways of communication through like intranets and portals. Really, and particularly we see this in retail, right, as you're trying to reach very remote populations, how do we do that most effectively?
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
And I want to ask a question.
Want to share any challenges that they have?
Questions over the phone line.
Get one over the chat about any research or surveys performed about providing employees the choice of technology they use as part of the total rewards. I haven't seen any research or surveys around that. What I've seen, though, is sometimes when employers will survey associates, they will ask about their preferred methods of communication and technology and their preferences of how they communicate, and providing information over multiple mediums. So, again, through the internet, but also, delivering the same messages through other vehicles and other forms. Yeah. So not necessarily the choice, but just understanding preferences of how employees want to be communicated with, and giving multiple medium to that.
And the general focus from employers going out to their employees and asking about technology and communication is really about improving the effectiveness. I think there's a general recognition for the most part that it's not that effective, and as employees are becoming more and more inundated with kinds of messaging, how to get their attention, and attention spans are very, very short, is really understand what is going to get their attention and actually engage them in a way that they do understand what's being offered. You'd be surprised at how many employees have no idea what the things are that are even available to them. We hear all the time in the focus groups that we typically conduct.
Not even the focus groups. When I can walk into a total reward strategy session with HR folks, I can't tell you how many times some benefit or perquisite or offering will come up, and somebody in the room will say, "Oh, I didn't know we offered that." So it is really about increasing awareness and understanding. And I think to Adrienne's point, it's about more frequency of touch points, but it's also about those touch points are going to resonate and be, short, immediate, quick, but also, balanced with ensuring that there's some level of understanding and awareness. Chat, thank you.
Anything else?
If you'd like to ask a question over the phone lines, that is *1 on your telephone keypad. The questions over the phone lines at this time.
Well, thank you. So, no, if the folks from 210 want to close it up, or if there's anything else before we close the call.
Hey, this is Jeff. I wanted to talk about the HR credits. If you can talk about the HR credits and how those that are interested in HR credits, how they get them.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Me?
Do you want to share that with the team?
Well, I know it's through Willis Watson, right?
Well, it's through SHRM, and I think the certificate that I think needs to be sent out to participants that needs to be filled in.
And their number. So for anyone who participated, we have your email address. We can email you the certificate as well as the number you need to put in the SHRM website to get the credits.
Thank you.
Well, I guess if there aren't any other questions, then we'll give everyone the gift of 5 minutes back. And once again, for those that are in East Coast, I know this is lunchtime, so giving up your lunch is probably asking a lot, but everybody on the executive board of HR for 210 definitely appreciates your time and your participation, and please keep eyes and ears out for our next Lunch and Learn.
Everybody.
Thank you for joining us today. This concludes today's web conference, and you may now disconnect.